All right. Good morning, everyone. I see we still have some folks joining. We've got a lot of great content to cover today, so we'll go ahead and get everything kicked off. We are recording the session. We will make it live to everybody, so be on the lookout for that afterwards. Again, we wanted to thank you all for joining us here at HashiCorp and the folks at AWS. We've got an exciting session today. We're going to talk about some lessons learned around how public sector organization that we have mutually worked with handled a stalled migration and then was able to get over 200 applications up and running into the cloud within 6 months, and really leveraging some good best practices and tools across HashiCorp and a lot of the great operating models and structure across AWS. And we're joined by a couple of great folks here. So Vinny Ramirez on our side, who's a senior solution engineer, Urshad, who is the worldwide partner solutions architect at AWS, and Tim Olson, who's another senior engineer here. We will have a live Q&A at the end, but if you all have questions during the presentation, please feel free to put them in, and we'll make sure that we get them added to the queue. And with that, Vinny and Urshad, Tim, I'll turn it over to you guys.
Thanks for that layout there for us, Chris. And let's dig in. Let's get some formal introductions out of the way. So hello, everybody. My name is Vinny Ramirez. I am a senior solutions engineer at HashiCorp, and I've been with the company for 2 years now. And a little on my background, I actually am a veteran of the U.S. Navy. So if we have any veterans or active duty military on the line, thank you for your service. Thanks for being here. And since leaving the military, I was in from 2000 2004. I kind of went on to live the life of an IT guy at various companies and several verticals, including healthcare, construction industry vertical, as well as finance. So all very heavily regulated in their own rights. So watching that journey in the private data center is something I've been a part of, and then, more recently in my career, focusing on enterprise solution and software companies that focus on that.
Hello and welcome. Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Urshad Bush, and I'm a solutions architect in the public sector team here at Amazon Web Services. And I have been here at the company for about a year now, and helping partners and customers in the public sector side to go and take the journey to the cloud. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining. My name is Tim Olson. I'm also a senior systems engineer here at HashiCorp. I do cover the public sector space and have been around HashiCorp here about a year and a half. Catching up to you there, Vinny. So I've been working with the public sector teams here in different agencies to help drive the adoption of hybrid and public cloud solutions, as we'll be talking about today. So thank you all for joining.
We all know who each other are. Let's dig into the content and hopefully have plenty of time for an interactive session at the end here with Q&A. So Urshad, I think I'll pass the mic to you to kind of set the stage of public sector and really where Amazon fits in that world.
Sure, thank you. So I just wanted to take a few minutes and talk about the public sector customers, why they choose Amazon Web Services, and then talk about some of the features that really matter most. First is the global infrastructure. The Amazon Web Services global infrastructure is secure, extensive, and reliable cloud platform, offering more than 175 fully featured services from data centers across the globe. The cloud infrastructure is built around the concept of AWS regions and availability zones. Think of a region as a geographical location in the world where we have multiple availability zones. Right now, as we speak, we operate more than 76 availability zones within over 24 geographic regions around the world. We had additional plans for the availability of the additional availability zones and regions. each AWS region is designed to be completely isolated from the other AWS regions, and that gives us the greatest possible fault tolerance and stability. Since the availability zones are isolated, we make sure that we connect them through low latency links that gives us high speed connectivity. Security. Security at Amazon Web Services is the highest priority. And the way we think about the security in the cloud is much like the security that you may have seen in your on-premises data centers, without the cost of maintaining facilities and hardware that we have been used to in the on-premises data centers. In the cloud, you don't have to manage those physical servers or storage devices. Instead, you use software-based security tools to monitor and protect the flow of information into and out of your cloud resources. The AWS cloud enables a shared responsibility model when it comes to security, which means we at Amazon Web Services, we manage the security of the cloud, including the infrastructure, regions, availability zones, the services, underlying services, be it compute, databases, networking. And then as part of that shared responsibility model, you as the organization and the customers are responsible for the security in the cloud. This means that you retain the control of the security you choose to implement to protect your content, your platforms, your applications or databases no differently than you would normally do in an on-site data center. Scalability. Now, this is a feature that eliminates organizations and customers guessing on infrastructure capacity needs. Let's say in an on-premises model, you want to roll out an application for your end customers. And then most of the times you would be either over provisioning or under provisioning. And that's how we deal with the on-premises data centers. With AWS cloud computing, these problems go away. You can access as much or as little capacity as you need, and then scale up and down or scale out or in as required, depending on your requirements and the traffic that hits your applications. Reliability, that is the ability of the system to recover from, let's say, infrastructure or service disruptions. What if there is a problem or there's a service disruption? Reliability makes it possible for you to dynamically acquire computing resources to meet the demand and then mitigate those disruptions, maybe because of a network transient issue or maybe misconfigurations. Next slide.
Yeah, thanks, Arshan. So let me introduce just the company HashiCorp for anybody that may not be aware. A lot of people come to know one or a few of our solutions, but don't really know too much about the company itself. So HashiCorp was founded in 2012. To date, we're now at roughly 1,000 employees, and we have some pretty significant funding backing us and a very large portfolio of enterprise customers that pretty much range every vertical out there, including public sector as well. And off to the right here is really just the various solutions that HashiCorp has produced. The unique model that is adopted at HashiCorp is all of our solutions start in an open source format, so they're freely downloadable, and really that's meant to encourage a rapid use of the tool and help individuals just learn our tools and do it without any real barriers. And we'll talk a little more in depth about why these tools exist, but just wanted to kind of get it out there that that's sort of where we've come from and our roots in the open source. The view here of the world is we have 4 of our solutions that not only have an open source offering, but also do have an enterprise offering. And In the enterprise offerings, we're focused on the challenges that are faced by a highly regulated organization and start to introduce capabilities to deal with the types of concerns that an enterprise has, like collaboration at scale, security, audit trails, access controls, those types of things tend to come into play, as well as support for our solutions. So here's a view of the HashiCorp stack, as we like to call it, that has enterprise offerings. And we operate really in four key areas of IT operations that have always existed. So we have solutions that align with operations, security, networking, and all the way up to the developer experience in the runtime space. So this is where our solutions sit, and it's actually very helpful for customers to see this, because then it tends to map back to ownership in a traditional data center sense. So moving away from product, we wanted to just kind of high level the state of the cloud for some folks. You know, they may have been, you know, well headed down this road and very mature in their journey to the cloud. Some customers that we consult with, or agencies that we consult with, are just at the beginning of that journey. So just want to kind of not make any assumptions here, and just fully state kind of the view of the world and some of the things that are happening in the industry. So when we talk about hybrid cloud, that's really a journey that traditional organizations that have maintained a private data center historically tend to be on this journey, the hybrid cloud journey, where you know, their technology usage existed well before public clouds did, and arguably will still have some workloads that live in a private data center even now in the era of public clouds. And really the main point to kind of highlight in the traditional data center space is that it is in fact a static world. It's a finite world. So when Irshad talked about some of the capabilities of Amazon, it's no secret that you can only rack and stack so much gear in your private data center before you use up those physical resources. So a platform like Amazon tends to introduce this infinite ability to scale. Along the journey in the private data center, there's also been the challenge of how to move quicker. And that's really kind of brought about a lot of private cloud or heavily automated postures in the private data center. How do we provision resources as quickly as possible and do it through automation in a repeatable way? This has kind of brought about a handful of technologies, you know, the VMware solutions really arguably introduce a certain layer of automation if you start to get into some of the orchestration tooling that they introduced. And then some of the private cloud solutions, the likes of OpenStack, if anybody's had some exposure to that, would really kind of fit in that private cloud space. And those still would live within a customer's four walls or through, you know, a managed data center partner like Equinix and the likes of those. And when we start to look at Amazon, and really this impact now is that dynamic use or introduction of APIs and services that can be freely consumed and really don't have a limit in terms of how much of a server or a database or a serverless function can be called and executed. It's pretty infinite. And really the hybrid world is now this space of operating a traditional data center. Maybe you have a private cloud or some heavy automation and investments in your own data center. And then sort of then looking at how do we harness these public clouds that are now available, specifically the Amazon platform, and where does that even fit? What types of workloads go to a cloud like Amazon? And at HashiCorp, we like to just kind of high level the two worlds. Traditionally, systems of record have tended to live in a private data center. And really the value of a public cloud would be to start to harness those dynamic and infinite resources to sort of reinvent your systems of engagement or some type of service that can take advantage of expanding and contracting and really having no limit to the resources it can consume to complete its job, you know, support the mission, take a spike in activity, and then kind of spin that down and save costs later, or, you know, be efficient with the use of the infrastructure. So the big question that all of our customers have is how do we live in these two worlds? How do we do this as fast as possible while also staying secure, right? This is kind of scary when you leave your four walls of your private data center and start to move into a public cloud. So with that, the public cloud itself has put a lot of pressure on private data center operations and sort of the way we've done business kind of for the past 30 years, if you will. And what I mean by that is in the private data center, we tend to see that we've standardized on the ITIL, ITSM types of frameworks and methodologies that were very ticket driven. To do anything in a private data center, it tended to be driven by a request that then got fulfilled by some team that was in control of some piece of that request. That actually gets challenged in public cloud and when you want to move to a platform like Amazon, because it's really a platform developed to support this DevOps methodology now of giving developers full control of the infrastructure that their applications will ultimately run on, and also giving that control to them in an API driven way or a highly scalable self-service manner. So if I need a stack of servers, some databases, some load balancers, being able to control all of that in one fell swoop versus having to request some other team configure and stand that up for you. So really what I like to say here is that these two worlds are really colliding here as you start to look at what public cloud represents and the state of the public cloud, this self-service world, and trying to connect the dots from the way we've always operated in our private data centers. It tends to be kind of a rough start for a lot of customers, and this is really where HashiCorp kind of enters the story in terms of our solutions and our workflows. So let me just show you that real quick. The way I like to frame this up is in the private data center, especially for our folks here in the public sector, highly regulated spaces, the golden rule has always been a very rigid standard operating procedure methodology. So I mentioned that I'm a veteran and I've had exposure to this from a defense side. Very, very well documented procedures and methods of operating. This is how we do things here at this organization or in this department. If you want to do something here, this is exactly how we do it. So we've over time developed these standard operating procedures in our private data centers. We know that very well, whether or not that's a fast process or not. It's something that we're comfortable with and we can execute on safely. The challenge now then is how do we reinvent our standard operating procedures to include some of these key topics you'll face and have to solve for when you enter a public cloud. And I've kind of outlined them here. There's infrastructure as code. Identity has changed a lot in the public cloud, so we now need to look at an identity-based security model. There's the networking aspects of going from a high trust network to a zero trust networking posture. And then there's a lot going on in the space right now around orchestration and how to do that in an API driven way. So really what we're saying at HashiCorp is you're going to have to figure this out anyway, whether you figure it out in the public cloud directly, or if you start to work on this in your private data center, you're going to have to reinvent some of the way you do things that will challenge the tools that you use. And that's really where HashiCorp sits. So we have a suite of solutions and workflows to support all of these areas of traditional operation. And we'll hear some more today about how some of these solutions and tools have helped enable a particular organization that was struggling to rationalize these two worlds and really align and get the value of the use of Amazon. So that's sort of where HashiCorp sits. It's very high level, but maybe in the Q&A we can drill down on some of what we're talking about with these solutions. It's not really, I'm not trying to pitch products here, just talking about the problem statement. So when it comes to optimizing your migrations and even where to begin, Amazon is a great partner in terms of they're very methodical in how they approach this problem. So I'm gonna hand this over to Irshad to talk about, when you consult with Amazon and start to look at consuming their offering, how they can help. And it's not just a product story. They've really put a lot of thought and methodology around it. So Irshad, if you want to go with that one.
Sure. Thank you, Vinny. So here at Amazon Web Services, based on our previous customer experiences, specifically in the public sector side, we have created a program called Migration Acceleration Program, which comprises of a number of phases that you see. And this creates an efficient and effective approach to migrations through these phases with a number of processes within these phases. The first one that we start with is the assess phase. This is the beginning of your journey. And the way we think about it is it basically sets the foundation for a well-planned and well-executed migration. We also come up with what is called as a migration readiness assessment. We complete this within the assess phase that helps you to determine your organization's capabilities, your readiness and commitment to migrate to the cloud. During the process of the migration readiness assessment, we also look to quickly follow the assessment via what we call as a rapid discovery of your portfolio, your applications, your databases, and then create a refined total cost of ownership report for the project. We also provide discovery and business case tools free of charge during this phase to help you to get the project launched. As part of the assess phase, one of the key things that we do is look at your licensing structure that you come up with from the on-premises model, and then help you with what we call it as bring your own licenses model in order to make sure that we keep that total cost of ownership as down as possible. The second phase is the mobilize phase, where we have a lot of activities. Let me touch upon some of them. For instance, we have a landing zone where we look at your footprint that you run in the on-premises data center, and then we try to create your data center in Amazon Web Services, including your networking topology, your account structure, users, groups, and then different privileges from the security perspective. We may also, look into the possibility of looking at multi-region design, but that's one of the things where Amazon Web Services really shines. Think about if you have to build a backup and disaster recovery system put in place in addition to the applications run in a specific region. And then we also implement identity and access management strategy in that phase. The migration plan. Now that's the meat of this, where we lay out the overall migration plan, created including cost estimates, communication and change management plans. We partner with Amazon Web Services ProServe, which is our consulting organizations, and we also partner with some of the other partners who have done this many times in the past and bring their skills on the table to help your organization to lay that migration plan and then put it in place. Center of excellence, that's another key thing. We understand the pain when people come from the on-premises data center, from the legacy architecture, and then they are taking those first steps, dipping their toes in the cloud, taking those first steps into Amazon Web Services. There is this curve of that we have to deal with, of learning new technologies, new services, new concepts, and that's where we come in, and then we help to train your team with cloud expertise, and also give you the concept of the security that I talked about earlier. And then the key strategic business roles, which are part of that skills and center of excellence. And then finally, we have the migrate and modernization phase, which builds on top of the earlier two phases, where we execute large-scale migrations and cloud operations. After the completion of the mobilize phase, migrations can proceed rapidly and efficiently during the last phase, since it builds on established foundation capabilities. infrastructure automation is one of the key things that we help organizations to put in place, because once you have codified your infrastructure, it becomes very easy for you to go and then stand it up in a different account, in a different region. All it takes is essentially to go and execute that infrastructure code in a simple process. Next slide, please.
Yeah, thank you, Arshad. Let me grab this next one here. So really what Arshad is presenting, if I actually go back here on this one, right? Just to confirm, Arshad, MAP is really kind of like a subset of the CAF, the Cloud Adoption Framework at Amazon. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Good that you mentioned about this. So CAF or CAF, the Cloud Adoption Framework, we built it internally, again, to make sure that we help customers and organizations like yourself to go in and then help you with the cloud adoption and the migration process. Not only does it focus on the technology perspectives, but also there is a lot of focus on business perspectives, because one of the key stakeholders in this journey is the management, the C-level guys, and that's where that cloud adoption framework focuses on, with the help of a number of perspectives on business and then also technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that clarification. And the reason I wanted to bring up the cloud adoption framework is that HashiCorp, we actually have a kind of a similar framework. We call it the cloud operating model. And there's some very key areas that we focus on when we start to consult with our customers or public sector agencies. And really it's that translation of, we kind of all get the value of moving to a public cloud and harnessing that, but it tends to be a very tough journey to execute on. So the way we like to break this down, removing all products, if you will, is a journey to go on with the customer to kind of rationalize a few key points, right? The hybrid cloud world or cloud native world is going to challenge your existing people. There's going to be a need to learn new skills, hire new people, or retrain people to start to adopt these cloud capabilities, the tooling and new workflows necessary to start to execute in a cloud environment. And with that, along the way, it will challenge your existing processes. So kind of in a previous slide there was introducing this need for a reinvention of your standard operating procedures. There's going to be change, and that has to just be accepted. And along the way, you're going to need to maybe even reorganize some teams to find those people that really want to be a part of that change versus maybe just kind of keeping the lights on operations as you've always known, and versus like the people that really desire to retool and harness these new skills of cloud automation and operation in a public cloud. So there's a lot going on here that's very much cultural, right? And it's not about products, it's about how you align your strategy to start to execute this type of transformation within your own organization. And at the end of it all, kind of where our solutions would sit would be as you start to rationalize your talent and your skill and your people base, bounce that against what types of processes need to change and standardize on that. The systems to execute this will also change. And this is where HashiCorp would love to be a part of that conversation, or at least educate you on how our solutions fit into this journey of reinventing and recreating your systems and ways that people gain access to these public clouds that you start to introduce as operating locations for your mission or for the charter of your organization. So one note here is, as most companies and or public agencies go on this journey, there's kind of this high level ask from those above. They say, okay, go figure all this out, and by the way, don't break anything. And that's the challenge, right? Is how do you make a complete overhaul reinvention of yourself and your process and your people, maybe even introducing new tools, but how do you do it in a way that doesn't just cause some type of gap or outages or disruption of service to your day-to-day operations and your standard mission that you're there to uphold. So there's a lot going on here, a lot to unpack, and just wanted to get kind of that high level out there of how we like to approach and consult at HashiCorp, especially when partnering on Amazon related projects. So it's a really good fit. So one of the things we offered up was a couple of best practices to share for folks attending the webinar today. So I'll fire off this one here, and Urshad, I'll kind of invite you to maybe riff on this a little bit. Key best practices that we've seen, trying to just bubble it all up, of advice to give someone that may be starting their cloud journey, or reinventing themselves, or maybe stepping back at and taking a failed cloud project and trying to figure out the lessons learned from that to move it forward into success. It all really starts with executive sponsorship or your leadership sponsorship. It's one thing to set a mandate that, we will be in the cloud, or a certain percentage of workloads will be in the cloud. But if there's no real meat behind, the decisions and the commitments and the funding to push that from an executive level very high up, because we're talking about change, reorganization, maybe some new tooling. These are big decisions. And if you don't have high enough sponsorship to make that successful and to stand behind the decisions being made, it's really kind of doomed to fail from the start. Actually, before I jump to the next one, Urshad, any thoughts on that from an executive sponsorship level?
Yeah, that's one of the key, like I touched upon when I was talking about the cloud adoption framework. That's one of the key aspects of the best practices. We want to make sure that we have the sponsorship in place, and then the C-level guys specifically, they are part of the engagement, part of that whole process, not only from the financial perspective, but also have your blessings. They had to be included in that journey, no matter how long that takes. Like the migration acceleration program that I talked about, one of the phases, the middle one, typically runs from 2 to 6 months. So we want to make sure that we have that sponsorship all along that journey, in addition to the additional phases therein.
Thank you. Yeah, so kind of, I want to leave some time for Tim to hop in here and talk about our real world use case. So the other best practices to share today would be a clear alignment to a business group or project or mission. So there's, you don't want to find yourself in this building a system for some future workload that doesn't exist. You could find yourself just building something to build it at that point. So having maybe some low-hanging fruit, or maybe a very mission critical project that gets a lot of focus, and being able to align with that and say, if we solve this problem, it means this to us, versus if we just build a framework to use cloud, maybe people will use it, right? So that's kind of where we're going with that, on finding the right business group or project in your organization that is impactful and that has enough impact and value back to solve some of these problems of how do we shift some of this workload. And if you don't have that, again, you might find yourself just sort of building a process for the sake of building it. And we've seen some of our customers get caught in this loop, and eventually it sort of dies on the vine. And it's very unfortunate. That could lead to a failed cloud project. And kind of the last one here is that kind of back to the people, right? If you aren't executing a cloud migration project or hybrid cloud project with the right folks, so kind of the word of caution here is that you got to have the people that really believe in this new world of API driven everything, self-service, and heavy automation, right? It's different than that ITIL based world. And you really need to foster that culture and mindset of the people setting out to execute this are people that are, putting on that modern practitioner hat of, yeah, if I have to point and click my way through this, that's a problem. If I have to open a ticket, that's a problem. We need to be able to automate this thing end to end. And if if you don't have that right culture from the start, you're going to set yourself up for failure. So, Urshad, I'll give you 1 second to kind of throw any last minutes on that best practice here, but I'd like to get us moving over to Tim to talk about the use case today.
Sure.
Anything else you want to throw out on the best practice?
I think you covered it all. Let's go. Maybe there will be questions towards the end. I wanted to make sure that we have enough time. Yeah.
All right. So just kind of this last funny, excuse me, animation I like to share is, as you're going about this journey, this is change. Change is hard, right? So you're going to face resistance, and really, the key to success is finding ways around that and getting, people spun up and excited about this, right? And it has to be meaningful for them to say, I'm going to stop what I'm doing to invest in the future. So let me try to bring it all together here by inviting Tim Olson to talk about a real world case study.
All right, thank you, Vinny. Appreciate that, and thank you, Urshad. Thanks for laying out the hybrid cloud adoption journey and talking about some of the changes that are going on and some of the capabilities and really the benefits of moving into this whole hybrid cloud architecture. Excuse me. And what we're really interested in seeing is how this journey looks and how we're seeing this being adopted in our public sector clients. So let's dive a little deeper here into a large federal civilian agency who undertook this journey. Actually, they're in the middle of this journey right now in how they're working towards adopting this hybrid cloud model. So about 3 years ago, the civilian agency started on this adoption. How do we want to move some of our applications in the cloud? So they had an aggressive target. They wanted to move many production level applications into the cloud in their phase one. And they had targeted Amazon Web Services. As Urshad laid out, there's a lot of capabilities, a lot of services, a lot of things that Amazon offers, and that was their initial target, so they could take advantage of those capabilities. So they started out the project using a cloud management tool, a GUI-based cloud management tool from another vendor, and they started working on how do we take and try to manage this cloud environment along with their own environment. How do we make this workflow happen that we can do this in a productive, predictable fashion? And they started having issues right off the bat. So they ran into issues around a cumbersome type of workflow. It was difficult to manage and have a standardized click-based methodology, if you will, using a GUI-based environment. Nothing wrong with the GUI, it's just for driving automation and predictability and repeatable. It got very cumbersome for them. They also found a very big challenge in managing and changing the underlying infrastructure. They had a hard time, with this type of approach to see what was happening, to be able to understand what was deployed, how to change it, how to go back and get rid of it, how to do all of these kind of environments in a hybrid or cloud-based architecture. Some of the issues they ran into was it was very slow to add new cloud offerings or new services. It was very difficult to change this environment. So that whole methodology and approach became a very slow, very challenging process, and they were having a hard time making any progress getting apps into the cloud. So they're looking at now moving into a more infrastructure as code-based environment. They initially tried using one of their configuration management tools that they had within their facility already that they were using for managing their on-prem server environment. That started the process of standardizing, as Vinny was talking about, moving to this infrastructure as code approach, standardizing on, trying to move into a codified environment where they could have a more predictable workflow. But they ran into other issues around how do we do this with a configuration management tool? How do we manage underlying infrastructure? And we actually got to the point where one of the quotes from the customer was, changing infrastructure became scary, as it was hard to track and know what was happening under the underlying environment. So they had no way to automate and manage and control the whole environment. So during that phase, they did a lot of hard work and laid down a lot of the initiatives that Vinny and Urshad were talking about, but the progress was slow. So we entered in to these folks, started working with this large civilian agency. Right now, it's probably about a little over a year ago. And they brought in Terraform. As Vinny was talking about earlier, Terraform is HashiCorp's automated provisioning tool for provisioning and deploying infrastructure across a hybrid cloud environment. So they brought that in, and they started working with this Terraform as an initial prototype environment. They kept and wanted to keep the infrastructure as code approach, because that became for them a standardized methodology that they could now use. And using an infrastructure as code approach, they also were able to build in workflows now that incorporated their version control system that they were using on site. So not only were they using their version control for developing their apps, but now they could bring it into the whole workflow around their infrastructure as well. So they're moving into that whole DevOps methodology and bringing that into their facility. When they started bringing in Terraform, that became a much more predictable fashion. And in the customer's words, it was a game changer. So they were now able to standardize on their environment. They had predictable workflows. They had repeatable methodologies. And the changing and management of the underlying infrastructure was not only automated, it was known. They could actually go and run Terraform. There's a part of Terraform that's called a plan that you can see whatever changes you want to make to the infrastructure before it actually happens. So they know it was there, they know what the change with impact would be, and they could now prove it or deny it depending on what has to happen. And that was a real game changer for them. Once they started using Terraform and introduced Terraform Enterprise to have this more at scale so they can have teams and role-based control and those kind of things, they now started to rapidly move forward, right? The provisioning and deployment of infrastructure across this environment was greatly accelerated. So they had a lot of teams now were able to come on board. They were able to drive this with confidence, as the customer puts, both from their operational side and on their security side, because they knew it was being deployed, they knew it was consistent, and they knew that the underlying infrastructure would be just what they said it was going to be. One of the biggest aspects about this was they removed all these bottlenecks they ran into initially to provision in a hybrid cloud, right? To really stand up this infrastructure and take advantage of, deploying and standing up resources on AWS, right? This became a really fast environment. And to give you an idea of some of the things they ran into, during the initial phase, like I said, they were just kind of starting out and trying to drive this environment to the cloud. They had around, I think it was around 4 or 5 applications that they started to move in that environment. During the phase 2, and they started working with this automated approach with Terraform and infrastructure as code and the workflows and everything we're just talking about, they rapidly deployed many services. Now they're up to about over 200 applications in the cloud, and 150 of which are production level mission-oriented apps. So to give you an idea, they went from around 5-ish applications initially to now over 200 applications, well over 1,000 servers, 100 databases, and a myriad of other services, including load balancers, S3 buckets, Elasticcache, Elasticsearch, all these other kinds of things that they need to support their environment. And they did that in less than 6 months. And so they really rapidly adopted this methodology and brought it into play. One of the other key changers here wanted to bring in was Sentinel. So by using Terraform and Terraform Enterprise, they were now introduced this, our product, HashiCorp product called Sentinel. What Sentinel is a policy as code engine. So it's very similar to infrastructure as code, except now you're defining policies. And what they're able to do now is they use Sentinel to provide the necessary guardrails for their agency. So any policies that needed to be enforced for compliance and just security reasons and all the things you need when you're standing up infrastructure could now be performed in the actual workflow itself. So they were working closely with their security teams and their infrastructure teams to define these policies to ensure that what they were standing up was done quickly and within policy. This became another game changer. It's become very predictable and very consistent from a security team perspective. So now today they are moving rapidly into the next phase. Like I said, they had rapid growth and removed these bottlenecks, and they've got well over 200 apps in the Amazon today. And now they're moving into phase 3, and they really want to start adopting what Vinny and Irshad were laying out, was grabbing the whole hybrid cloud, right? So now they've already got this running with huge adoption in Amazon. Now they're expanding out to hybrid cloud, and they really want to reach back and have their initial on-prem as their first aspect of that, and potentially other clouds depending on requirements and services as needed. So that phase is undergoing now, and what's really enabled this was laying down that underlying infrastructure, that standardized approach to provisioning and deployment across hybrid cloud, which is of course Terraform. So now that they have this fundamental standard architecture, they're able to rapidly move forward on this whole hybrid cloud methodology, including on-prem. They are continuing to use Sentinel, and Sentinel is now becoming adopted across this entire infrastructure, and they're defining their policies, they're written out, they're enforced, they have audit trails laying out there, so they're moving towards getting their ATO and driving this out at scale across the hybrid cloud. One of the other things that was an interesting aspect of this is they are taking great advantage of a capability in Terraform Enterprise called modules. And modules allows the agency to build production level or ready building blocks for their infrastructure that they know are fully tested, fully vetted, and ready to stand up. So I can now just go and stand up a module that says deploy this infrastructure. It could be storage, it could be network, it could be database, it could be all the above. And they have a standard repeatable methodology now that they can use as building blocks across their environment. So users can now deploy a module and not have to actually get into the code that maybe their ops teams or developers are working on. So next slide, Vinny. Thank you, sir. So some of the key lessons here as this agency was, actually is on their journey. This is a current journey. They're well into it now. Was from a security aspect, actually even from a full workflow aspect, was using infrastructure as code, right? So this not only enabled them to drive a standardized approach, adopting a standard workflow across their hybrid cloud, but it also now allowed the whole version control system capability of their infrastructure. So they could leverage the code reviews, they could leverage the collaboration, they could leveraging all the auditing and capabilities that the VCF system provides them, now not only at the development code level, but at their infrastructure level as well. So that became a real game changer for them. As we already mentioned, Sentinel is key into this change, and it's actually being driven and expanded on today. And Terraform Enterprise is going to enable that whole ability to have standardized, predictable approaches that they could now automate and drive this whole adoption of the hybrid cloud. And this became a very agile environment, right? As we mentioned before, they had struggled getting the applications to the cloud, but now because they're able to standardize on the approach, they have standard modules, they have standard automated methodologies, they're able to be much more agile. So they can add and remove infrastructure quickly. They can move forward in new offerings and new capabilities that may be offered in Amazon, for example, that they want to take advantage of. So they're much more agile, much more flexible as a result of adopting this architecture. So as mentioned, they already have the homegrown systems that they're moved away from. They're using standard product now, in this case from Amazon and from HashiCorp. So these allow them to get a full supported product, enterprise level capability that's well documented and has training and learning and all those kind of things for their teams. And this is all, again, standardized across their environment. This resulted in a lot of reliable infrastructure, but it was parity across their development methodologies and consistency between their dev, test, and production. So they're able to know and see what they were progressing. They were able to know and have consistent abilities to move that forward and produce that across the full hybrid cloud. So this became a really nice fundamental architecture that they're using the standard modules, standard approaches, to be able to enforce and drive not only for their initial adoption of AWS, but now as they move broader into the hybrid cloud. So overall, this agency made rapid progress once they started adopting a lot of the things that Vinny and Urshad were just talking about, and moved quickly in just a matter of months to really driving the cloud adoption into their agency. So they're successfully on the track and moving forward today. So thank you, Vinny.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. So that's quite a mouthful for everybody, but we're going to hang out here for a few minutes and feel free to enter a question in the chat on your Zoom, or we might have a few that came in along the way that we can ask as well, but try to give you some time to ask us questions. Chris, do we have any questions that came in that we want to start with? You out there, Chris?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Vinny, there were a couple of questions from Steve Burns. I responded back. One of them was about the CAF applicability to GovCloud and CWS. I will have to check on CWS, but GovCloud, yes. And then also there was another question about GitOps. And you responded back again. We definitely support GitOps using a number of partner products and services around Amazon EKS, which is our Kubernetes, managed Kubernetes service. And we just announced it's also available in GovCloud as well. It was announced a few days ago. And then that allows you to deploy Kubernetes applications at scale using GitOps.
Yeah, thanks, Arshad. I see a question here from Matt. It looks like the question is, do you need to have the full stack for it to work? I'm assuming that means the HashiCorp stack. And so I can answer that one real quick. Our solutions, and let me just kind of rewind to the stack itself so we're talking the same language here. So to answer that question, no, you do not need to use all of the HashiCorp solutions in this stack here to gain value. Really, everything Tim was presenting today was specific to the Terraform solution at the bottom of the stack here. And that's really that infrastructure as code journey of codifying your operations. And then you have starting to build a library of repeatable and reusable code that can also be audited and approved for use in your organization. So once you codify things, you just start to kind of reuse it. You can solve, this is how we configure a VPC in Amazon, for instance, and this is the way it should always be done. And then you can start to enforce that best practice or standard operating procedure is followed with a tool like Terraform. We're not a platform, although if you do combine all of the HashiCorp solutions, they have synergies with each other. You're dealing with solutions from the same vendor from a support perspective. So there's advantages to do that, but you can absolutely a la carte use our solutions. So hopefully that answers the question there.
Awesome. Thanks, Vinny. And apologies for earlier. I was on mute, did not unmute myself. We do have another question that came in. And Tim, this might be a good one for you to answer since you were so close to the case study we highlighted today. But the question was really, how did you work with the security teams to write in the right kind of policies and leverage some of the HashiCorp tools during this process to make sure all that was enforced the right way?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, so what the civilian agency did was, the effort started out primarily from the infrastructure side, interestingly enough, to be able to drive, this migration or movement of applications. As most environments at the time, there were, separate teams, right? There was the infrastructure team, there's an ops team, there was a developer team, and of course the security team. As they moved forward and started to introduce Terraform Enterprise and started to work on these policies and compliance capabilities that Sentinel brings, they were able to bring and work with the security team, right? And they introduced them to the concept of code, policy as code, right? So they're able to show, that not only can we codify these policies that the agency has and build these guardrails and ensure compliance, I can show you the code. The security team can now be involved in the development of the code. And so what they did, they brought them to the table, and it became another team or a combined team where they were able to help develop some of these policies, help develop some of the code, although the security team didn't write the code, but they helped establish and build the policies in a codified format. And then we're able to see the resulting code, and then was able to look at that as a audit trail, because Terraform provides audit logs, to show that not only was the policy written and applied into the workflow, you can't get around it, it's in the workflow, that you could see it actually being applied from the audit logs. So it became now, instead of a, after the fact, go run a tool, go assess this, go analyze that, it now became a built-in process to the workflow. And the security team was now coming to the table, not after the fact table, but during the process and development of the whole, how do we move to hybrid cloud methodology and approach, and they became part of that process. So it didn't happen right out of the chute. It took time to work with the team and show some of the capabilities, but they now are bringing them to the table, and they become part of that process and are now a contributor, if you will. They don't write the code, but a contributor to the process. So it now becomes much smoother, much more expedient, and they're working to actually develop what documentation can we generate to get our ATO and things like that. So it didn't happen overnight, but it was a process that we're able to bring the security team to the table, so to speak, to be part of that whole team.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim. And it looks like there's actually a question that stems a little bit from that one too. And it's really around, dealing with the hybrid cloud environment and managing kind of that sensitive information from an on-premises world to an AWS world, and just kind of gaining a little bit of understanding how you helped this customer kind of through that journey and are still helping them through that journey.
Oh, right. Yes, thank you. Thank you. That's a very interesting question, because as Vinny was laying out there in the model, but as you start adopting the hybrid cloud and you start moving, to the applications into that environment, you start hitting the, the zero trust issues and things like that. What is now going on, and this is actually part of phase 3, is they are in the process of a heavy evaluation of Vault. So Vault Enterprise is, as Vinny was laid out in the model there, that is the security or secrets management level of the whole cloud operating model. So as part of the journey, they started with the provisioning of infrastructure in an automated, predicted, secure fashion. And now as they broaden into full hybrid cloud, and they start realizing that we are in a zero trust environment, they're now looking at evaluating Vault. So they're actually moving that along the process, and that is going on now, actively in process.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim. And it looks like that is kind of it for
there's
questions.
Actually, I just noticed there's a question here from Steve, Chris, about how does HashiCorp membership to CNCF impact the public sector? So mind if we jump on that one real quick? We have time, right? We have about a minute.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question, Steve. The impact is very positive. Right? So as Vinny and Urchad were laying out there from a cloud model perspective and adopting the hybrid cloud and all these abilities to move the hybrid cloud, to move applications and develop new applications in that cloud environment, HashiCorp is very much a player and now contributor and force or participant in the whole container native environment. Right, so HashiCorp's architecture fully supports Kubernetes, containers, all of the elements around standing up a containerized environment. So this architecture embraces that whole model, allows you to get to the more ephemeral, immutable type infrastructure approaches, which is all part of this whole journey as you move forward. And it can build it into not only your moving into the cloud and the containers and immutable infrastructure and all that really cool stuff. You can also continue to maintain what you're doing today on-prem. If you're doing a lot of VMs and a lot of more traditional approach, that's fine. You can have the entire architecture support that. So very positive being part of that, and very much moving forward, looking forward to make that even more successful.
Awesome. Thank you, Tim. That actually takes us to the top of the hour and kind of the presentation for today. Thank you to everyone who joined. Again, we are recording this session. We will have this out live. There's also a couple of helpful resources too. If you go to the HashiCorp.com page, all up, you can find some links for our office hours to support. And there's some great folks across our team who dive in specifically to any kind of on-premises and cloud issues, and you can surface a lot of the questions and challenges there and just work through them with a HashiCorp solution engineer. Again, thank you everyone for joining today, and stay tuned for some of the future webinars that we'll be doing in the future with AWS.
Thank you all.